Students, we have studied a leaf spring suspension system, which is an example for rigid axle suspension system, and McPherson suspension system, which is an example for independent suspension system. So today we are going to discuss the comparison between rigid and independent suspension system. What are the differences in these two suspension systems? As shown in the figure or in the screen, the first one is rigid axle suspension system is a simple arrangement. In the case of independent suspension, it is a complicated arrangement compared to leaf spring suspension system. As shown in the figure, you can see McPherson strut suspension system. It is very complicated. It is connected to the steering hub, steering link and frame, etc. But in the case of leaf spring, it is very simple to mount or install. That is the first point. The second one is rigid axle suspension system use leaf springs. In the case of independent suspension system, coil springs are used. Third one is the up and down movement of either of the front wheels cause a vertical tipping effect on other wheel, as these wheels rotate on a common axle. We know that in rigid axle suspension, one axle is directly connected to the each wheel's suspension system. So if any deflection occurs in one side wheel, it will affect the other side of the wheel. But in the case of independent suspension system, there will be a minimum effect on the other wheels if one wheel is affected by any deflection. Next, shocks are transmitted from one wheel to other wheel in the case of rigid axle suspension system. We have already discussed that the wheels are mounted in the same axle, so the shocks are transmitted from one wheel to other wheel. In the case of independent suspension system, shocks are not transmitted from one wheel to another wheel because the wheels are independently mounted with the suspension system. Now, fifth one, rigid axle suspension system does not allow more deflection of the front wheels and have some effect on steering. In the case of independent suspension system, it allows more deflection of front wheels without any effect on steering. As you can see in the McPherson strut suspension system, the wheel assembly and the suspension system have lot of space, but in the case of leaf spring suspension system, the wheel assembly and the leaf spring assembly is adjacent, so the deflection, because the steering system deflection will be minimum in leaf spring suspension system, but in the case of McPherson strut suspension, steering is very easy or more deflection is possible. The next point is in rigid axle suspension system, spring weight is more. In the case of independent, spring weight is less. You know that leaf springs are used in the rigid axle, it is very heavy, and coil springs are used in the independent suspension system, it is lesser than leaf spring, lesser weight than leaf spring. Next one is vibration damping is less effective in the case of rigid axle suspension, and it is more effective in independent suspension system. Vibration damping means to minimize the vibration of springs. Independent suspension system is more effective. In rigid axle suspension system, the vibration will continue more time than independent suspension system. The last one is the maintenance cost of rigid axle suspension system is less compared to independent suspension system, because you can see the arrangement of suspension system in independent system is very complicated, so the maintenance will be automatically more compared to leaf spring. Leaf spring is a simple arrangement, so the maintenance cost is also less. These are the comparison between rigid axle suspension and independent suspension system.